In time, they will join you in the sun. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders.
Well, it's been a long time coming. So after several missteps, cancelled projects, and company mergers, a reboot of the DC Extended Universe, rebranded as DCEU, is officially happening under James Gunn. They'll be leaving the current DCEU behind in the fractured state that it is, in exchange for a fresh start. And if it isn't clear by now, that means that the world Zack Snyder set up and the story he was telling in his DC movies aren't coming along for the ride. James Gunn and Warner Bros. Have shown no interest in continuing it, and Snyder himself has been busy over at Netflix working on multiple projects. And that also goes for this final wave of DC movies. Everything from Shazam to Aquaman 2. It's getting released, then left behind. Many feel that this was a long time coming, and that Warner Bros. And DC were just kind of waiting for the right time to do it, because their initial attempts to course correct had some very mixed results. And the fan base itself is pretty divided, with different groups wanting different things from these films. So I guess it's only natural that Warner Bros. And DC just want to wash their hands from the situation and just move on. Clean slate, if you will. It's been a very interesting journey, with Snyder's movies in particular being some of the most controversial and comic book history, and then their attempts to steer away from that direction also had very mixed responses. And it leads to a very just disjointed universe, really. So I guess it's no surprise they want to leave it all behind. So like every other channel that's creatively bankrupt on this website, I think it's time that we just take a look back at the DCEU, talk about the ups and downs, the good and the bad, the drama and controversies, and really just have one last hoorah, because this has been one crazy thing to witness over the last decade. So just sit back, relax, and let's have a final look back at the DCEU. It's time for a little backstory. Around the time Christopher Nolan was working on The Dark Knight Rises, sometime in 2011 I presume, he had an idea for a Superman movie. So he teamed up with David S. Goyer and they got a script written up, and pitched it to Warner Bros. But after doing 3 Batman films, Nolan was kinda ready to move on for comic book movies, so they needed someone else to direct. And so, Nolan reached out to Zack Snyder. Like in his previous work, especially 300 and Watchmen, he talked to him about directing Man of Steel. Snyder read the script and jumped on the opportunity. In an interview from about 6 months ago, Nolan had this to say about Snyder and why he picked him to direct the film. He said that it was the new approach Superman required. Referring to Zack Snyder, Christopher Nolan said, he understood the power of iconic images, but he also understands the people behind them. It's ironic, but it's very productive irony. You're dealing with a filmmaker who has deconstructed this mythology and now has to reconstruct it. That's a fascinating challenge for him. But anyway, not long after accepting the director's position, Snyder casted Henry Cavill as the lead. And well, I think you know what happened next. Nolan stayed on as a producer, while Snyder directed the movie. And thus, it was a brand new beginning for the DC world. Now before I proceed, I want to tell you guys how I'm going to structure this video. I'm not going to go movie by movie, basically giving like a mini review per release. Instead, what I want to do is just give like a general overview of how audiences and critics reacted at the time, and how this affected behind the scenes production. I more or less just want to recap the reception from audiences and fans, and what was happening at the time of its release. I mainly want to give you a general overview of everything, as well as a timeline of events. Everybody got it? Alright, good. Let's continue. Now, Man of Steel released in 2013 to some pretty mixed reviews from critics, but mostly positive reviews from fans, and it even had a decent box office pull. But the question on everybody's mind was, what happens next? You see, at this point, the MCU was in full throttle, and fans were yearning for a shared universe with DC characters. They wanted to see the Justice League members all on screen at the same time. Snyder and others involved liked the idea, but initially they actually really wanted a direct sequel to Man of Steel, you know, a Man of Steel 2, before they actually take that leap. But then at San Diego Comic-Con in 2013, an announcement was made.
The one man beat you.
Whoa! What? What?
That's right, Batman and Superman on screen together for the first time. The internet went nuts. People wanted to know who was playing Batman, will this lead to a Justice League movie in the future? The next year was met with so much hype, rumors, and speculations. Honestly, it was a very fun time. And then it was revealed that not only was there a Batman and Superman movie happening, but Suicide Squad as well. And yes, they were all taking place in the same universe. Then at Comic-Con, trailers were revealed, and this just set the internet on fire. Then a slate of movies were also announced that will be releasing over the next couple of years. They had solo movies planned for nearly every DC character. Wonder Wonder Woman, The Flash, Aquaman, Cyborg, Green Lantern, and of course, Justice League Part 1 and 2. They laid out a roadmap, and at its helm was Zack Snyder. He was basically the architect for this new universe. The goal was to work with each director to help introduce and flesh out the world, with a mainline story involving the main Justice League members. Basically, Snyder would be at helm of the Justice League movies, and then others would build on and add to the universe. It seemed like a solid plan, but even before Batman v Superman's release, issues were already starting to brew behind the scenes, much of which didn't come to light until years later. Let's go ahead and discuss some of those things now. For starters, BVS was cut down from its original 3 hours to 2.5. This decision was made so they can maximize the amount of times it could be shown in a theater per day, so that they can make some more money. But what suffered even more at the time was Suicide Squad, being directed by David Ayer. Ayer has been very vocal about what happened behind the scenes, and it really boils down to this. Ayer wanted to tell a darker, more serious story, and that's basically what he shot. But then with the release of Deadpool, he was forced to reshoot and rewrite large portions of the movie, and Warner Bros. Even brought in the studio who cut together the trailer to edit parts of the movie, to try to make the movie fit the style and tone of the very bombastic Bohemian Rhapsody trailer. And what was the result of all this meddling? Well, first, the box office pulls were huge, with BVS bringing in over $800 million, and Suicide Squad bringing in over $750 million. So, a lot of people saw these movies, but what did they think of them? Well, the audience and critic scores weren't too kind to these movies at all, getting absolutely blasted from all sides. I would like to note that many later on would change their minds on BVS with the release of the Ultimate Edition, but the overall opinion of many at the time was DC dropped the ball. So the public opinion wasn't that positive, but the aftermath and fallout behind the scenes was even more devastating. Ayer was basically blacklisted and hasn't worked with the company since. And as for Snyder, things were actually even worse. You see, Snyder was already involved in many other projects. Like I mentioned earlier, he was basically the architect. One of the movies being Wonder Woman. It was being directed by Patty Jenkins, with Snyder producing and getting a writing credit. But more importantly, Snyder was set to direct Justice League. These movies weren't that far out from release when changes were being made to them, mostly as a response to the backlash received from BVS and Suicide Squad. Wonder Woman was already being filmed, whereas pre-production was just getting started on Justice League. For Wonder Woman, the biggest change mentioned was the third act and final battle. Originally, they didn't want to have a big battle with Ares, but they were forced to because the studio wanted to have a big final battle. But despite that change, the movie overall was still pretty well received, scoring well with critics and audiences, and having a good box office pull. Now, the same cannot be said for Justice League. So a tug-of-war began behind the scenes over Justice League, over the direction to take the movie. Snyder and Goyer had their vision of the movie, but the studio wanted to change it to try to fight the backlash they got for BVS and Suicide Squad. And a whole lot of stuff happened. New producers were brought onto the set to oversee and enforce new scenes and rewrites, with them even bringing Joss Whedon to do additional shooting. And on top of that, there was now a 2-hour mandate, meaning the runtime of the movie couldn't exceed 2 hours. It was a mess, and it basically went like this. The original script was rewritten prior to filming, then as Snyder began filming, parts were being changed and added that the producers and studios wanted, which led to them shooting multiple versions of the same scenes. The idea was basically to try to remake the movie as it was being made. Snyder ended up shooting most of what he wanted to, but it was like pulling teeth to get it done. Now, unfortunately, as they were wrapping up shooting, Zack Snyder's daughter would pass away, which eventually led to him stepping away from the project while it was in post-production. While he was away, Joss Whedon was put in his place to reshoot parts of the movie and somehow splice the footage together with some of the stuff that Snyder filmed, and the result was a Frankenstein's monster of a movie that was shot out into screens in November of 2017. Now, the box office was okay, but considering its $300 million budget, it definitely wasn't making a profit. The reviews again were pretty mixed, but mostly negative. But what was most important to Warner Brothers is that they finally got rid of Snyder, and they basically let him take the fall for all the complaints their newly established universe were receiving. And with him out of the picture, it was now their time to try to course correct. But keep Snyder in the back of your mind, because he's going to pop up again later. Now, this next era of the DCEU is what I like to call the course correction phase, starting with Aquaman. Aquaman was in production around the same time as Justice League, and was planned to release in the summer of 2018, but then it was pushed all the way back to the end of the year in December. There were also rumors of rewrites on this project as well, but nothing that was on the same level as Justice League or Suicide Squad. The only major rumor I remember hearing was that the director James Gunn left the project, but that wasn't true at all. So following the disappointment of Justice League, the hype was starting to slow down for the DCEU, with many seeing the first 5 movies as a mixed bag at best, or just straight up garbage at worst. But against all odds, Aquaman performed well, very well actually, becoming the first and only DCEU movie to crack $1 billion, and even the reviews were mostly positive, with many finding the movie just to be a straight up fun time. It was also the only DCEU movie released that year, with many wondering what's next, because at this point, the roadmap from years ago was clearly not happening. No rumors of a Justice League sequel was brewing anywhere, Henry Cavill's role as Superman was up in the air, and the previously announced solo Ben Affleck Batman movie ran written by, directed, and starred Ben Affleck himself, went quiet, and the status of the Flash and Cyborg movies were unknown. The only project that was guaranteed at this time was Shazam. What was happening behind the scenes was basically Warner Bros. Had no idea where to go next. They pulled the plug on all their previously planned projects, and were trying to figure out what they could do to try to win over public opinion. Aquaman was a hit, but they needed a follow-up to really sway fans. So they started to focus on different areas. Not really wanting to commit to a full-on shared universe like planned, they started just dropping and planning a few solo movies that were loosely connected to the universe. Which there's nothing wrong with having solo adventures. Not every hero needs to appear in every movie. But this was a bit different, because it felt more spiteful. Like they were just throwing their arms up and saying, fuck it. You'll see what I mean in a sec. So now we're in 2019, and Shazam was released, and just like the year before, it's the only DCEU movie that year. It had a much smaller budget when compared to the previous entries, but it was received very positively. Sure, its box office wasn't the biggest, but it also wasn't nearly as expensive to make, and at this time, Warner Bros. Was more focused on trying to steer away from what came before, with a different tone and style. Even though the reception was very positive, many still felt like it was just copying the MCU, with its style of humor and jokes, but overall many didn't really seem to care and just enjoy the movie for what it was. But there was one scene that got the internet stirring, and that was a cameo from Superman as an end credits scene. Only issue was that it wasn't Henry Cavill. It was a headless cameo with no lines. This confirmed to many that Cavill was out as Superman, which upset many fans. But to add on top of this, around the same time the Affleck solo movie was handed off to Matt Reeves, and would no longer be starring Ben Affleck, or be connected to the DCEU at all, which basically meant that Affleck was out as Batman. So now there was no Superman or Batman in this shared universe. And as a side bonus, The Flash was going through its own issues, with many different writers and directors leaving the project, just failing to get off the ground. But hey, it's alright. Warner Bros. Just had two successful movies back to back. They might have just lost their biggest and most recognizable heroes, but it's fine. They were on a hot streak right now. So what was the next project? An R-rated Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey movie. This one was kind of a head scratcher for many, and seemed to come out of left field. And putting it lightly, it's not really what fans wanted, especially after hearing there's no Superman or Batman anymore. That alone killed a lot of people's interest, and that reflected in the box office poll. Released in early 2020, it barely cracked 200 million. Although the reviews from both audiences and critics were pretty positive, no one went to go see the movie, and it really showed the differences between what the studio wanted and what the fans wanted. The studio seemed content with just having a dismantled universe with a bunch of different solo adventures, and having no one fill the roles of their two biggest heroes, while fans kind of wanted a more cohesive universe. And now at this point in early 2020, there were only two more planned DCEU movies, a sequel to Wonder Woman titled Wonder Woman 1984, and then a pseudo-sequel slash reboot for the Suicide Squad called The Suicide Squad, written and directed by James Gunn. But this is where we're going to put a pin in the timeline for just one moment, because we got to backtrack just a little bit, because between 2017 and 2020, when all this was happening, there was something brewing online, and it's about time we discuss it now. So let's backtrack a bit, back to 2017-2018. After the release of Justice League, speculations and rumors started brewing of another version of Justice League, a more complete version, a different cut, a Snyder cut if you will. This was mainly for a few reasons. Number one, the theatrical cut felt drastically different than any of other Snyder's previous works. Number two, there were several scenes in the trailer that just weren't in the movie. And number three, word started to slowly come out about the issues behind the scenes, about Joss Whedon being brought in to reshoot and re-edit the movie, and as information trickled out about the alternate version of Justice League, more and more people started to get invested. But what really did it was the small breadcrumbs left by Snyder himself. You see, over on his Vero account, Snyder would randomly release these black and white pictures from Justice League that no one had ever seen before. Some of them were scenes that weren't in the movie, some of it was just behind the scenes images of cast members, some of it was unfinished VFX, and some of it was storyboards. And this all stoked fans' interest. The word started spreading, so much so that Warner Bros. Themselves came out and tried to squash these supposed rumors of a Snyder cut, but in doing so, it just got fans even more invested. Before long, fans were putting out petitions, getting hashtags trending, and pulling some stunts to get people's attention and spreading the word. All the while, Warner Bros. Was just chugging along, not really trying to engage with them more than they already have. Now, I'm kind of skipping a bit here, but basically what happened is that Snyder continued to drop images every now and again, while fans would try to get more attention to it. Many fans even did several events to raise money for suicide prevention and awareness. But then finally, an event was organized on November of 2017, on the 2-year anniversary of the release of Justice League. It was a simple goal. All the fans would simply tweet out, hashtag release a Snyder cut, with the goal of getting it on the trending page, sharing all the images and information that has been gathered so far, and it was a success, with even the cast members tweeting it out, garnering even more attention. Overall, the event was a success, but no one really knew if the bigwigs over at Warner Bros. Would even listen. That was until 2020. During a live Q&A stream of Man of Steel with fans, Snyder brought in Henry Cavill to make an announcement.
I don't know, what do you think, Henry?
I reckon you should show it.
We're doing it, so get ready.
Oh my god.
It was finally happening. Zack Snyder's Justice League was officially coming out. It was almost like a perfect storm of events that led to it. You see, Warner Bros. Was about to launch the new streaming service, HBO Max. And with the pandemic starting, many films and TV shows were put on hold. But with fan interest in this unreleased version of Justice League on the rise, and them already having footage anyway, they approached Snyder with a proposition. They would let him finish his movie, you know, the VFX and soundtrack, and then release it exclusively on HBO Max. Snyder agreed, and thus it was time to put the finishing touches on the movie. Snyder also used this opportunity to film a few extra scenes that he never got to do back in 2017. And so promotion on the film began. There were trailers, there were posters, you could buy some merch, some t-shirts, and Snyder himself actually appeared on several different streams with fans and was just chatting about the movie. And that's how most of 2020 was spent, just hyping up the Snyder Cut since it was officially happening and releasing in 2021. And honestly, it was the most exciting thing happening in DC at the time. Remember, by 2020, we only received 3 new DCEU movies since 2017, and none of it was really building towards anything and not featuring mainline Justice League members, except for Aquaman, with the only future projects being Wonder Woman 1984, The Suicide Squad, and Black Adam, all seemingly disconnected from each other and just doing their own things. And not to mention Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck out as the roles of Batman and Superman still upset many people. The release of the Snyder Cut felt like an event, and when it released, it really was. It dropped on HBO Max and received a lot of attention, and the reviews were just as favorable. Many enjoyed the movie, so much so that a new hashtag was born, hashtag Restore the Snyderverse, and this became the most tweeted hashtag in history, getting over 1.5 million tweets in 24 hours. So many people were invested and wanted to see what Snyder's universe was supposed to look like, and get this version of the DCEU. Hype was huge for this movie, and later on when it would release for DVD and Blu-rays, those also sold very well. Sure, many people had their issues, most of it being about the runtime, but overall, fans' interest was at an all-time high for the first time in years. For comparison, Wonder Woman 1984 released a few months before this did, in late 2020, in theaters and on HBO Max, and was met with an abysmal box office pool, and just very poor reviews from fans and critics. And after a few weeks, the movie was removed from everyone's subconscious as they looked forward to the release of the Snyder Cut. I brought up Wonder Woman 1984 to show where fans' interest truly lied, and it was with the Snyder Cut at this time. So you would think that only an idiot wouldn't see the potential and capitalize on its newfound success, especially after having little fan interest for years at this point, and now having 2 back-to-back flops. You would think they would rather move forward with what fans were asking for, and what was getting the most attention, right?
Wrong!
It was confirmed later on that the release of the Snyder Cut was the end of Zack Snyder's DC trilogy of movies, even though the movie ended on a cliffhanger and set up for a sequel. The fans complained, and there were several more attempts to get attention and show that many people wanted this continuation, but it was all in vain because Warner Bros. Stood their ground and moved on, possibly killing the most hype and fan interest they've had in years at that point. The Snyder Cut was a once-in-a-lifetime thing that we got to see play out in real time, and more than likely might not see anything like it again. We saw dedicated fans fight back against a studio decision, and for a brief moment, achieved a victory by seeing a movie that many thought was butchered and tossed to the side. Of course, in the end, it didn't really matter in the long run because of Warner Bros.' inability to capitalize on the opportunity, but overall, this was a win for the fans, and the last time fans were really this interested in the DCEU again, as you're about to see. So after crushing the possibility of continuing the Snyderverse with a Justice League sequel, what was happening next? Well, there were 2 more DCE movies planned to release. First was James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, released a few months after the Snyder Cut in the summer of 2021. And then there was Black Adam planned for 2022. The Suicide Squad received very high reviews and ratings from fans, and is actually one of the highest rated DCEU movies, up there with the first Wonder Woman, though the box office pool wasn't nearly as high, becoming one of the lowest performing movies in the DCEU. Though it would be fair to say that this was in 2021, where COVID was still a bigger deal than it is now, and it was released simultaneously on HBO Max and in theaters. Although if you look at the other movies around the same time as Suicide Squad that were also released on streaming services and in theaters, then you see that the argument doesn't really hold weight. But Warner Bros. Didn't seem to care too much, actually announcing a show that was directly tied to the Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, with Gunn acting as the showrunner, head writer on the project, and even directing a few episodes. The show would go on to perform very well, with Warner Bros. And Gunn very happy with the show's reception. Now this is all around 2022, by the way, which was the same year that Black Adam was set to release. But we also got word at this point that Shazam 2 was coming out in 2023, as well as Aquaman 2, The Flash, and Blue Beetle, all planned for the following year. And at this point, we're getting to the final stretch of DCEU movies. We just didn't know it at the time. The rest of 2022 was pretty quiet, with the most notable thing being Black Adam dropping in theaters that October. And even though it had The Rock backing the project and promoting it to no end, the movie fell short of expectations, bringing in just $390 million, which actually was the highest grossing DCE movie since Aquaman, by the way. But obviously that's not saying much considering the little draw the past 4 movies have gotten. Not even announcing Henry Cavill back as Superman was enough to save the movie and get fans' attention. Overall, the movie was a flop, and didn't take off the way they probably wanted it to. Or maybe not, because not long after, in early 2023, an announcement was made. First was the forming of a new studio under Warner Brothers, well, now called Warner Brothers Discovery, called DC Films. Because believe it or not, they didn't have a separate studio that solely focused on just the movies. Kind of like how even though Disney owns Marvel, Marvel Studios is still a branch that actually makes the movies. But more importantly, James Gunn and Peter Safran were put in charge of the new studio, and would be planning out the future projects. But the biggest bombshell is what came after. At the end of January 2023, Gunn announced not only a whole new slate of movies, but a whole new universe. A reboot of the DCEU, now just called the DCEU. There were a bunch of new projects announced. Some of them were carried over from Gunn's DC projects like the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, with others being reboots entirely, like a new Batman and Superman movie. But TV shows and anime projects would also be part of the shared universe as well, with the goal of having just one continuity between all these different forms of media. This was the first time in years that DC actually had a plan. Some people were excited, some people were upset, some people didn't care anymore because they checked out a while ago, but regardless, this was the plan moving forward. And so, 2023 marked the final stretch of DCEU movies before the reboot, with Shazam 2, Blue Beetle, The Flash, and Aquaman 2 being the final releases. Now, either intentionally or unintentionally, by announcing a brand new DC universe happening in just a few years, it actually had an effect on these last 4 upcoming movies. You see, no one really cared anymore. Regardless of the quality of the movies, good or bad, the attention and hype they were receiving was crazy low, with flop after flop after flop. The only one that performed decently well was Aquaman 2, and even that just barely beat out Black Adam. But to be fair, I don't think Warner Bros. Discovery cared too much and already chalked these movies up as a wash anyway. Apparently Blue Beetle is supposed to take place in this new DCU, but it really doesn't matter that much. These final 4 DCU movies were just brushed aside by fans, and the talk around them was just super low, with most just wanting to see what happens next in this new DC universe that Gunn and Warner Bros. Discovery have planned. I wish I had more to say about these last 4 movies in the universe, but there really isn't anything. Some people liked them, some people didn't, most people just didn't care. Many didn't feel it necessary to invest in these movies since now we know they aren't going anywhere. So they released, barely anyone saw them, and now here we are, just waiting to see what comes next. Just a very anticlimactic end to this universe. A universe that went through several different trials and tribulations. It didn't end with a bang, it just went out with a whimper. And that's basically it. That was the timeline of events and kind of what happened to the DCEU. In my opinion, it was a victim of studio reaction to negative attention that caused them to pull the plug on the cohesive planned universe that they had. And instead, they tried to apply hot fixes as they went, leaving each entry to feel disconnected from each other. It also didn't help that Warner Bros.' attention was all over the place. Besides having the DCEU and no direction where to take it, they also launched their streaming service DC Universe, which had several shows that shared their own separate universe. And they still had several other shows on the CW. And not to mention, there were new solo movies they wanted to focus on as well, like Joker and the Batman, with them actually planning sequels and follow-ups to these, with the Batman in particular getting its own separate universe on HBO Max. Basically, there was so much going on with DC and Warner Brothers properties that it was hard to keep it straight. Their attention and focus was just everywhere, and seemingly not really having a plan for much of any of it. They canceled the planned DCEU movies and opted to just drop movies that were loosely connected to each other that ended up underperforming, and most of the shows on the DC universe that they launched ended up either getting canceled or moved to HBO Max, where they were then ended. And they started slowly pulling the plug on several CW shows, sometimes with them even announcing a show, releasing a single season, and then canceling it immediately after. It was kind of a mess. This is why many aren't surprised by a full-on reboot. Things were just disjointed for a long time, with them having no idea where to go next. I personally believe they should have stuck with Snyder's original plan to have 5 movies telling one big story involving Darkseid, with each solo movie adding to the world, and every hero having their own little adventure. But that's not a timeline we live in, so here we are with a canceled DCEU that arguably has more misses than hits, depending on who you ask anyway. And the new DC universe planned has people either excited or indifferent to it. Guess all we can do is just wait and see what happens, and maybe they'll actually stick to their plans this time. But that's probably gonna do it for the video. Like I said, this wasn't like a typical retrospective. I really just wanted to give like a timeline of events to see the rise, the fall, the ups and downs, and really just what happened. If you want a more in-depth look at all these events, I recommend this documentary from the channel, Our Movie News. He basically covers the same things I did, but just way more in depth. Very solid video, and I recommend you check it out. Now, as for me personally, I covered comic book shit for a while now, years actually, and mostly DC focused stuff, and well, I'm just kind of done with it. And this video was just like a way to look back on everything that happened and be like, damn, that shit was crazy. I firmly fall in the category of people who just lost complete interest in the genre, and in the future I plan on covering different topics. Hope you guys stick around for that. If not, that's cool too. But anyway guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, go and drop a like on it. And leave a comment, let me know, what do you think about the DCEU? Where did it go wrong? Which ones were your favorite movies? Leave a comment, let me know. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.